college is becoming too costly for families making $300,000 or less. That's a pretty staggering statistic. I mean, I get why. Kudos to the marketing person who wrote it up that way, because I'm sure it's getting lots of clicks. If for no other reason, then that's a pretty jaw-dropping statistic that a family can make $300,000 a year and still not be able to send their children to school. Now, I want to break that down because this hype behind it, I don't think is helpful, in that it can make it seem like, right, this can drive outrage and make people go, college is becoming unaffordable, all this other stuff. Yes and no. So I want to talk about some of the things it's actually talking about. Now, first of all, it's talking about top colleges, right? And when I say top colleges, I'm talking about the names that everybody thinks of when they think of like, ooh, you went to Columbia, to Yale, to Harvard, to Boston University, to Cornell, these kinds of things. All right. We're not talking about University of Illinois, whatever, Urbana, something like that. We're not talking about that. Now, granted, even those schools are becoming further and further out of reach, but I do at least want to ground this, that if you're thinking, and the reason I would call attention to this, okay, just to give some context. I remember before having kids, hearing all these like terrifying statistics about the fact that nobody can afford to have children because it costs X blah, 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 millions of dollars to raise a kid from 0 to 18 or something like that. And it sounds extremely spooky. And I already look at the birth rate and what people are already scared to death to have kids. So then you start throwing around numbers like, even families that make 300,000 can't send their kids to college. All right, not accurate at all in terms of what it's saying. Okay, we're talking, might it be more challenging for a family making 300,000 to send your kid to Stanford? I mean, yeah, but it's also not even just can't send them. It has to do with this really difficult thing that's very personal for me because I experienced this. So growing up, when I went off to college, my parents were not, we'll just say, not in a desired position to support me very much financially. So it was like, well, you can go where you want to go, but you're kind of on your own. We'll give you a little bit of support, but that's it. And so for me, that put me in a really, really complicated position because a lot of times, a lot of students, I'm sure anybody listening to this might be familiar with this themselves. You're trying to get financial aid. You're trying to get, scholarships, awards, incentives, things like that to help bring the out-of-pocket cost down. And unfortunately, if your family makes too much, then the regulations and the guidelines won't allow you to qualify. But then you also don't have enough money to pay the tuition bill either. So you're in this really impossible situation. And this was the situation I found myself in that made it very difficult for me to navigate paying for college because my parents technically made more than qualified me to apply for financial aid and get the kind of support I needed to have some support in helping me pay for school. But they also weren't going to pay for any of it, or very little of it. And so it was like, well, now what do I do? Because now I'm kind of stuck. And this is really what this is getting at is now as tuition has blown up and the financial aid criteria really have not adjusted with all of this, you have tons of people who are in this really intense situation where they may have gotten accepted, maybe into their dream school. Maybe they got accepted into UPenn, or maybe you got into Yale. And you're like, sweet, mom and dad, like, great, I qualified, let's do this. And you go through the process and it's like, oh, yeah, you don't qualify for any aid. And maybe you have parents who are super supportive and go, no problem, we'll take a second mortgage on the house to send you to school. Or maybe you have parents like mine that are like, too bad, so sad, like, figure it out. And then you're left kind of going, okay. And this is how people end up with just ridiculous amounts of student loan debt. They get student loans from predatory companies, all this kind of stuff. So you can see where this is becoming really problematic. Now, what I don't appreciate is a lot of times people's response is, oh, college is too expensive, or, people don't need to go to college, or we look for these super simple solutions. And I don't think there's really any simple solutions. So my goal in this is just to give some guidance on how to approach some of this stuff. First of all, let me say this. College in general, in my opinion, is not something that people should just universally say, you have to do this. And I say that as somebody who has an undergrad and a graduate degree. I'm a big advocate for higher education. I think there's a lot of value that can come from it. But I don't think this just, well, that's what you do. You finish high school and you go off to college and you get a degree. It's not wise. And it's especially not wise in this day and age where tuition is insane and you have all these other additional complexities and all this other stuff. So is college a good thing for a lot of people still? Sure. Should you just send people to it? No, I think you should really take the time to go into it. And there's lots of other things that you can explore and examine as possibilities to actually figure out how to do this. Now, the other thing is too, there's this whole idea that if you go to college, you have to go to a top university or you're just screwed. You're done. You got to get into Yale, Stanford, UPenn, UNC, something like that. And if I didn't mention your school, please don't get offended. I'm just rattling some off. But you've got to get into one of these big schools or you're doomed. That's also not accurate. Okay. Are there advantages? I'm not going to say that there's not. All right. I have lots of friends and connections who have very much benefited from going to an Ivy League school and building relationships with some of the world's most elite people on the planet. And it's made their life a heck of a lot easier. Okay. You're going to have those stories. I also have lots of friends who are in triple digit, 6-figure debt for school that they couldn't afford to get a degree that didn't add any real meaningful value. And they didn't really make any of those amazing networking relationships because that wasn't really their focus. They just thought getting a degree from the school is going to magically open doors, and it didn't. So even if you decide after critically analyzing this with your children or even for yourself, and you go, I really do feel that college is the right thing, fine. Then look into what are your options? What do you qualify for? All this other stuff. And then from there, decide, do I really need to go to one of these top schools? Because honestly, the number of people I know who pursue these top schools for no reason other than just ego so that they can have a badge on their resume, it's not worth the debt and the headache of what you're dealing with for it. And I can tell you, the people coming out of these schools are not ridiculously more qualified than the ones who aren't. They just aren't. I worked for a company out east where I don't know how many Ivy League students I interviewed for jobs where I was like, there is nothing special about this. So an Ivy League degree does not make a great candidate. So if you want to go to school, you decide it's the right path, you think you're going to go to an Ivy League school and okay, but don't necessarily think that's what you have to do to make things work. Okay. There are plenty of other good schools that will actually pull this together and you can do it for a fraction of the cost. I know colleges now, you can get your undergrad for $24,000 total. That's not a year. That's total. Okay. So the idea that higher education is out of reach, out of touch for anybody, not the case. Okay. I'm just saying that you can get a higher education degree without paying oodles and oodles of money. All right. But I think the other thing is really examine what are the other alternatives. And it doesn't mean, oh, well, it's either go to school or go into the trades, even though I think the trades are an extremely viable, really valuable path for lots of people to take. I think it's a great path for people to explore and examine. And you can do extremely well in that. And I would just encourage anybody to explore that as a viable option. There's no second class path for it. But I think it's one of those things where it's just like, do the time, take the time to figure it out, see if it's the right school, see if that's even the path you need to take, and then go from there. So is school becoming much more expensive? Yes. Is it becoming much more out of reach for a lot of people? I mean, yeah, in a traditional sense. Does that mean that you can't go to school anymore or you're going to have to sink yourself in debt? No. should you even be thinking you have to go to college in the first place? No, no. I know plenty of people who didn't go to school, then they got into a company that was going to reimburse them, then they did it afterwards and it was free type of. I mean, there's lots of different creative ways that you can accomplish it. So one, school's not the only path, higher education is not the only path. But even if it's the path, you don't have to take the freaking path that this kind of thing pushes that says you've got to do this and it's got to be at this school and it's going to set you back this many $100,000. So you're doomed. Okay. So there you go. There's my honest reaction and thought on this. And again, if you have questions on some of these creative things, reach out. Let me know. I've guided people through some of this stuff many different ways where they thought, here's what I'm really trying to achieve. And it just feels impossible. And through talking it through, it was like, oh, that actually wasn't as impossible as I thought.